Dan Shevchik, please could you introduce the first speaker? Yes, we spoke about that already. It is Mr. Mirek Topolánek, the first. Currently, he has rich experience from the business, but as we all know, he's been present in whatever was going on in the field of energies, being a former prime minister. So I hope that we will also hear something from this perspective, and perhaps he will speak about what he believes that the government should do nowadays. So I think that this is a very convenient beginning to the conference. Thank you very much and good morning, everybody. I lost 2 minutes, so without any further ado, I want to start. Plenty of idiots believe that there are physical and mathematical laws that can be voted upon. So there are economic impacts because there is lack of energy and there are growing prices and all that, and as a result of that there is the economic recession. People keep talking about market failure, but that's stupid because a market which is non-existent cannot fail. Even in the communism, when everything was centrally planned and therefore deficient and inefficient, and the market failed. So now we have the invisible hand of the market, and thanks to some decisions of the EU and of Germany in particular, we are approaching the scenario which we remember from the communist era. We can repeat 100 times that Putin is to blame, but it won't help us. The truth is that Putin just made brutal use of our failure and of our stupidity. It suffices to read the energy strategy for the period between 2003 to 2020. If we befoul ourselves and if we confound the reasons and the results or the outcomes, nothing will help. I don't want to polemic with the ideology of climatological changes, climatic changes. They do occur, but I prefer the targeted protection of environment, cleaning the brothel which we've had and the mess that is around. It is not the biggest or the strongest or the most intelligent that will survive. It is the one that can adjust the best, adapt the best. The vulnerability of the of the European economy is that whenever conditions on the market change, there are things which have to be changed and adjusted, and we don't do that. I have a number of scenarios where if you're going to help keep going, if you're going through hell, keep going. Never let good crises go to waste. No one quality, no one process. Well, I don't know whether to translate it in Czech. My favorite Milton Friedman said that nothing is free lunch. There is no such thing as a free lunch. And Viktor Chernobydin, we wanted to do the best, but actually the outcome was as usual. And then the road managers or the road managing societies, we were prepared for the winter, but there was unexpected snowing. So what is going? There is authoritarian regimes, terrorism, neo-Nazism, famines, fanatism, migration, aggressive war in Ukraine. The biggest threat, though, is China and its old new leader, Xi Jinping. Leaders in most countries have no guarantee for the life and for protection of their privacy or property. But the sun shines on all that, everything we speak about, the rights of the fourth and the fifth generation, the unisex toilets, right to child, right to to everything. So we are really trying to solve topics which are not the two topics. The basic topics which have to be sorted out are light, warmth, and energy. We read Miroslav Barta's 7 laws, how a civilization rise, prosper, and fall. However, restart is the goal for some. We destroy all that was before us and we start anew. The negative development has been accelerated. What happened since 2020? There was the pandemic. Since the March 2020, new life and labor standards, lockdowns, home offices, schools closed, high prices of commodities resulting in inflation, collapse of supplier chains, crisis of the supplying chain, economic slowdown, which probably will result in a recession. Joe Biden was elected president of the USA. Green Deal was imposed to repower EU environmental, social and corporate governance. The Russian invasion to Ukraine started. The post-war world architecture is starting to fail. Russia won't ever vote against itself in the Security Council, so there is a decay of the world order. What happened since 2020 in energy? The global gas market in the past 2 years was extremely volatile, has been extremely volatile. There were record low prices in the second quarter of 2020 because of the COVID, long winter 2021, the peak of the energy cycle, the intraday volatility, which is unprecedented. Then gas and nuclear were chosen as clean resources. Then unpredictable behavior of Gazprom, who is a 40% supplier of the EU gas consumption. There was a reduction of offer and the price went up. Losers and winners start to appear. Uniper, the loss of 30%. There is rationing plans. There are rationing plans for electricity and gas, and there is further pressure on capping of gas prices. The invisible hand of the market is now prevailing. We provoked this crisis. There are various scenarios. There are pessimists, optimists, depending on whether they see a darkness or light of in the tunnel, but the light can be the train that's going in the opposite direction, and then there is also the perspective of the train driver. These are the people who are now influential in the world. You can see them yourself, but who has the major coverage right now? It's Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. There can't be any regulation without undesirable side effects. If you take more pills, then the positive effects of them will just, the negative effects will combine and will annul the positive effects.
What is not proven to be efficacious, he throws the medicines into a basket and miraculously the condition improves. Or somebody who gets antidepressants and now ends up in intensive care unit. If we continue with more regulations supporting climatic revolution by accelerating our way to saving the planet, people in Europe will freeze in winter. 1/3 of the population will get into poverty. People will save for months for a Christmas tree, and thanks God helps us, there will be blackout. And there will be an experiment once described from left to arrived as the most massive failure of European civilization. Blackout, more than suspect, a book by Morgan, and the whole market is extremely over-regulated. Only winners speak about markets, cynical people and green left. I remember one green German parliament deputy who said, you know, Minister, we are afraid that when you speak about the market, you mean the free market. And there is a typical cascade, subsidies for renewable resources, and at the same time disqualification of fuel or fossil orders. And according to variable costs, if we have warning lights, these supplies, fossil supplies, are being suppressed. That made possible that there is even negative production effects if not subsidy tricks are used. In the situation when allowance is now between 70 and 100 euros, only a crazy people would invest into it. Moreover, there is a general approach that everything which comes from oil and gas is dirty, and therefore there are big losses as a result. A lack of energy power outputs and bigger differences between times where there is wind and the sun is shining and the other times of our life, and that resulted in what we can see today, more and more capacity payments or other tricks in order to make possible that fossil resources can work for several hours or weeks and sustain the grid and reserve output for clients. And ostracization of coal power plants started, and German initiative betting on Russian gas. And then Putin had to supply to spot market with increased prices for consumers and energy transfers that were meant for releasing the market, quadration of a circle. Problems partially connected with COVID made a price Armageddon of the situation. Russia just made use of the fifth column in Europe. For me, the only reason for decarbonization is to reduce imports of fossil fuel from such countries as Russia. But first, it's necessary first to save people and their basic need. The lack of Russian supplies leads to high prices. In the other slide, we can show that people who predicted the development were not silent. Over the last 10 years, I had many speeches around Europe and also around the world. And this is the slide that shows 6, 7, up to 8-year development. I pointed to a conference in Vienna, and probably in the back lobby, representatives of Gazprom were laughing at me. Today, they are not laughing anymore. What's the way of constituting the price of energy? According to the final closing resources in the EU, it's still gas-powered power plants. This is the equation for 4 allowances. How can we affect the price of gas? We cannot do it now. We cannot do it immediately. There must be enough supply. Can we do it in 3 years, in 5 years? And what will be the effect on the price of LNG? Can we go through the price of allowances, suppressing them or releasing reserves, carbon tax? EU doesn't want them. Or do we want to leave the principle by leaving the exchange in Leipzig? No. What about decoupling? Okay. If we decouple the price of gas from the price of energy, it would solve practically everything, except for social transfer. Germany doesn't want that. Why Germany doesn't want that? Because they would admit that they're part of the guilt in the current situation. And the second reason is that German citizens are not saving now using gas, and they would not if the price is decoupled from the price of energy. Of electricity. So this is my previous presentation, but it doesn't matter. Institutions of the EU suggested many policies, and we can follow the one that speaks about mix. That is a good challenge, but decoupling, it's not something that we can observe. What are the main developments of our emission allowances prices. It was more than 100, now it's around 70, 80, but they ignore totally energy safety. Imported fuels are prioritized over local production. Only emission emitted in the territory of EU are accounted for. Carbon print of GHE of the imported LNG is more or less the same as with the local lignite. Russian gas has only 85% of CO2 emissions as compared to lignite. It covers only a minority of the overall emissions of GHG in the EU. In 2019, the system of ETS covered only 38.5% of EU emission, which is a terrible distortion of the economic competition. Unpredictable and high price of allowances, together with extreme volatility of carbon prices, close to the behavior of Bitcoin, discourage of investments. Instead of releasing allowances from the reserve of market stability for repower purposes and for decreasing prices, we should use another way. How routes of supplies changed when we compare the first quarter of 2022 and 2021. Recently, the volume going through Slovakia, Ukraine and Germany, a part of supplies is through Turkey, going then through Hungary, but it stopped going to Central Europe. By the end of the third quarter, 11 member states had issued so-called early warning notices. You will see that in the presentation, reacting to particular steps taken by Russia, such as decreasing supplies or pressure on payments in rubles until closing the gas pipelines. Imports exceeded the imports, as you can see, and filled up gas tanks, better weather, warmer, better, and enough of liquid LNG on the ships exerts the influence on decreasing the price of gas. However, it doesn't mean a lot for the future. In the third slide, you can see increase on American LNG, which in 2030 can replace 36 billion cubic meter, which is almost 90% of the volume of 2021. What's our situation? Countries in the Central Europe are almost 100% dependent on Russian gas, and they rely on two routes. One is the Ukrainian route, almost uniquely Russian plane, and the other one is German route. The German route enables supplies of gas if there is enough volume for Germany itself, if Germany covers its own needs. So we depend on solidarity. No resources from the South Italy would have a lack of gas itself, and the terminal of LNG in Krk in Croatia is hardly covering the needs of Croatia and Slovakia. What is the projected consumption of natural gas in Europe without Russian gas? We can see supply from North Africa, LNG from Norway, local production, which is predictable, and as a result we can see this chart that shows what in the recent future would be our prediction for the next developments, whether we will be able to compensate for reduced supplies. Russian gas, you can see the curve, minus 15%. In the next period, we have to cover this lag by LNG supplies with presumption there would be enough of it, and there will be these routes from north of Africa and Norway resources, all the capacities would be modernized. The new liquefaction capacities would be extended. The consumption would be reduced by 15%, and lower needs of Africa would drag in Europe the development so that the price would be higher. Price of gas temporarily lower. This is how we save. Czechs do save. If we adjust it for the impact of weather and Počerady power plant, we can say that we behave rather correctly, saving as much as we can. But in view of the fact that the price of gas went down now, the closing facility could be coal-powered power plant. There are warm autumn months, the tanks are almost filled, and there are vessels on the western shore of Europe, which would mean that if we produce just 10% from gas and 40% from coal, the closing device could be again coal power plant, but it will not apply once the winter comes with the cold months. But we can see that the market reacts to every single stimulus, and this demand and supply chart is working perfectly well. By saying that, I wanted to say that there is enough reserves in Europe. 1/4 of the total consumption, 104 billion cubic meters, is here already stocked. Gas can be stocked for unlimited period, but as a matter of fact, not all the countries have their stocks. Only 18 countries of the EU have capacities for storing gas. What can we do in the current situation? I prepared several quotations of my favorite authors. Albert Einstein said, "No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it."
And I am not sure about the former. The only thing more dangerous than ignorance is arrogance.
And another of my favorite authors, Procházka, we have taught the elephants to fly for long, and now we are teaching horses to fly. They are 6 times lighter. If a vessel is sinking and there is a big hole in its construction, a reasonable captain will not sail its stuff to paint a mast. So, what can we do in the light of these approaches? Energy demands of the Czech economy is very high. It's by 40% higher than in Germany. It's double as big as the one of Denmark. Why is it so close? And where's the problem? In the US, the economic demands on energy are even higher than in our country by 10%. So the difference is in self-autonomy. With the structure of our economy, we must put absolute priority on either energy independence, which will not be so easy in Europe, or energy safety and energy abundance. What's the balance of fuels and energy consumption? We have to import almost 40% of energy that applies mainly to mineral fuels such as oil, gas and coal. Over the 7 months of 2021, we were pure importers of coal.
And the same you can see for oil, for gas. And you can see the figures. The Czech import of mineral fuels is compensated partly by the export of electricity. You can see also the total balance In 2019, we were net energy importers. For the past 26 years, we never paid more than 5% of GDP for fuels. The July prices for energies this year, it should go up to 7 to 9%, and it could even be up to 15%. So between 2019 and 2022, it could be about 700 billion crowns. That's quite tragic. The structure of the industry will have to change. The metallurgy has consumed 28% of all energies in 2020. 28% of all that was used in the manufacturing industry, while the share of the value added in the industry was only 4%. In January, the output was, the production was 16% lower. Companies want to restrict it or they will move the production somewhere else. There are few companies that can compensate the increases of prices by increased value added. So there can be investments in robotization, digitization and automation. It can be in the pre-manufacturing and post-manufacturing stage where the value added is higher, but it will necessitate the total restructuring of education. In the long term, this is the only way. We have to decrease the high requirement per unit of production. This will only contribute to the increase of the prosperity and of the living standard. And it is also a way towards the energy safety. We have to go back to earth. We have to go to the center of the energy trilemma. That is safety, availability, and sustainability. The ideal position is somewhere outside of the screen. I drew this just in order to demonstrate what we have to shift. In the medium run, we will have to take a number of steps to sort out the inflationary and energy and budgetary crisis. We need fiscal and monetary restriction, liberalization of the labor market, de-bureaucratization, reform of social health, educational system. We have to invest in energy safety, nuclear sources, renewables, whatever you want. The saving of and energy, improvement of energy efficiency, increased value added. You can see the graph, and that's what we'll have to do. In midterm, the EU will have to consider a long-term strategic approach to gas deliveries. There must be a transition period where there must be higher volumes from the pipes based on long-term contracts. There must be contracts for the LNG deliveries, as Asians do that, and there must be a pan-European regulation of pan-European harmonization on the European market. I speak about that, but I don't think that the EU will completely abandon the Green Deal. What it means, it is the imperative of construction of Dukovany, or reconstruction of Dukovany, and we have to consider smaller and more multivariate nuclear sources in various places of the countries. We have to decrease decrease the consumption of fossil fuels in transports and so on, and we have to have the reserves for a case of blackout. We have to be able to absorb the energies in one way or another. We have to decrease the costs of households, institutions and manufacturing plants. We will have to solve the transport problems. And we have to explain to people that their lives will change in the short run and it will be a worsening of the living standard. But this will all depend on our capacity to explain this to people and to our capacity to adapt ourselves to our invention, to our creativity, and it will depend on our courage too. I do hope that you will look back on my presentation, and you read it properly, because it was obviously read very quickly, but once again I repeat, it will depend on us whether the future generations will live in conditions which will be satisfactory for them. Thank you very much for the presentation. We still have a couple of minutes, so questions are allowed. What I want to know, a couple of days the gas price was even negative. I put aside the question whether the EU member states are afraid to do what you were suggesting, but what do you think about the level of gas price in the nearest horizon and in the long-term horizon? There is a diagram of a graph of supply and demand, and it works. Now prices are negative and we're in the Zen condition, but that's how it can be. In the shore gas is now being sold at very low prices because they have an excess in reserves. Everything is full, and all the containers are just packed to 95%. There is no further room for that. So there are not sufficient transport capacities. We don't consume the gas because the weather is still warm and the gas consumption was decreased. We do have the tankers, obviously, but it pays off for them to wait until the price goes up before they discharge their load. Such a variation is very short, and soon it will be winter and it will be colder, and we need to refill the tanks, the containers with a non-Russian gas. And there are terminals which are either floating or stationary. However, the problem is that the transport, the pipelines, a low throughput. We used to use it in the direction from the east to the west, and obviously the more to the west, the smaller the diameter of the pipes. So it is the reverse situation than the one we would need. So it will depend on the capacity of the throughput in the years to come. How much of it shall we be able to push through Germany? There is no other way for us in the future. That is why our representatives talk to Scholz or to Habeck, because the Polish route will only be available in the future when a new terminal is built in Poland. What needs to happen, and I hinted that, is that we will do savings much as we can. We have to be able to explain it to people to avoid a revolution and uprising. We have to close advantageous contracts, which may be quite difficult. There are forward prices which are very high for the years 23, 24, so everybody is waiting with the potential purchases to the end of the heating season, which is possible. There are things which will have to be adjusted in the pipe works, in the pipelines. We have to build new ones or increase their capacities. We have to negotiate with countries that will make it possible for us to diversify. There are suppliers, potential suppliers in Nigeria and in other countries. If I take Russia as unacceptable, hostile and aggressive and terrorist state, I don't think that countries like Iran, Iraq, Qatar and others are much safer and that the perspective is better with them. So all this will have to happen. For the time being, these mid-term steps of the government, as have been taken, are positive. Nobody knows what the real correct solution is. There is just one good solution, that's decoupling, and it's a massive financial transfer of the prices for the marginal or final power station. So there are decouplings on one hand and on the other hand, and whatever happens in the space between the two, nobody is able to predict the market. And the free room or the free spaces will be difficult to fill in using new regulations or new measures. I am quite skeptical, or I'm a mild optimist as to this year's winter, unless we have 3 weeks of -20 centigrade in January or February. So the basic problem where we would have to close the production capacities or reduce the deliveries, this may not happen. But the question is how the consumption will develop from a year from now, and how will it come from through those pipelines. Well, it seems to me that the extraction is increasing enormously, and not only in the US. There are new tankers which are being built, new transport capacities, and we can see how quickly, unlike the Czech Republic, building permits can be obtained, and how building of new capacities, be them floating or stationary, are much faster than in this country. Debureaucratization is the key word. I spoke about that. I think that all these countries have some national solutions prepared. They work on them. Every household, every company, every utility, every kindergarten is faced with the problems and starts to look for alternatives. They have problems. They are trying to build new capacities for heating, but building something without a building permit is a long way to go. Everybody did their deliberations, their estimates, their analyses. It is, we had the crisis after the Lehman Brothers fell, and there are sectors, obviously, and solutions had to be sought for. There are manufacturing capacities which can't do without gas or without energy, and then there is the threat, there is the compensation of 200 billion that is promised in Germany to the manufacturers. That is a threat for us, because it is actually very strong and unlawful competition for us, because it is a massive intervention of the executive power in the economy, and that's deadly. Thank you very much. Mirek Topolánek, if you remember the last slide, one of the hexagons, there was also the nuclear power generation, the small modular power generators. Not only gas is part of the reasons, of the roots of our today's crisis. In the media they don't speak much about that, but the truth is that in France, which basically depends on nuclear power generation, they have currently a number of nuclear power plants on the standby regime, because they are doing the maintenance. Let us see whether the nuclear power generation can be the solution, and to what extent. It is good for the baseload, for the basic coverage of the or input in the energy portfolio in various countries. But let us see what it means if some of the sources is eliminated for one or another reason. Are there any other technological solutions which would be based on the nuclear power generation, but which could work in a different mode? There will be another guest to our conference. It is Dana Drábová, and it's my great honor to extend my very cordial welcome to her.